Okay, so people are going to start coming in here. I'm wondering if we can track the number of participants. You can see it there hopping up on the bottom of the screen. So exciting to have so many people from all over the world today. Been looking forward to this actually. I love these misophonia clinics. It was a secret dream for a long time, and you know, trying to figure out how to connect people all over the world with people that know something. And that dream is coming true. And boy, look at them pour in. I wish I could see each one of them, but it's going to build up very rapidly. Good morning, everybody. As you're coming in, we're going to have a little brief chatting, and we're still uploading two of our participants. And so we have four of us here and two more to join. So, you know, the world of technology, and just really glad to see everybody here. And I'm glad you have some patience. You know, patience and the state of misophonia don't really go together too well, do they? We're not too patient about waiting to figure this thing out and find where we're going in the future. We're impatient. So this is another step in that direction. Good, looks like we have almost 100 people with us now. Welcome and good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. We are connecting up with two of our other panelists at the moment. And on the screen, you should be able to see, and I'll say their names and they can wave their hands. You should be able to see Chris Pearson from all the way from the United Kingdom. And he's been part of our group for such a long time. It's kind of hard to remember how far back that was. And
all the way back to Chicago,
I think.
It seems
Chicago?
like it was, yeah, so long ago, but way before that with Tom Dozier and connections, and he is participating today from the United Kingdom, and again has a thriving personal practice and also a professor. So it's exciting to have you here. I know people are going to be very interested. And then on my screen here, we have Dr. Cindy Simon from Florida. And Cindy is going to be our MC today and our host. And Cindy is an audiologist, and she's been part of the Misophonia family here with the Misophonia Association forever. And she is going to be in charge of the questions that were sent in today. So really looking forward to that. And then also on the screen, you should see the picture for Dr. Jolene Jaffe, psychotherapist from California. And Jolene has been part of our group again from the beginning. These are pioneers. These are people that walked into this forest full of unknowns and said, I'll walk with you. I'll see where you're going, to these people that were showing up in our clinics and saying, I have these strange symptoms and I can't figure out what's going on with me. And so Jolene and Cindy and Chris are some of those people who said, I don't know either, but I am going to walk with you and hold your hand so that we're not alone. And I just can't say enough about that. You know, the foundations of the Misophonia Association, those were those days. There are very few people around the world gathering together saying, we're all seeing the same thing. What is this? And then now it's been, 10, 11, 12 years later. For me, it started in 97, and everybody thought I was a weirdo. Marcia Johnson from Portland, Oregon. And I was told I was crazy. I needed mental health therapy. I'm like, no, you don't understand. You don't understand. There's these people knocking on the door. And so we opened the door, and we're still opening the door. So today we're going to enjoy a misophonia clinic, and we have questions. And I see Dr. Bradshaw's coming in now. There's Megan. Hello, good morning, Megan. I see you there. She's from the Chicago area, an audiologist, spent a long time working with misophonia, and has a lot to offer. All of these people have been presenters, at our conventions. Some of them you might see still photos, and there looks like Dr. Cowan is making it in here. Ezra Cowan. I think he's from the New York City area. Is that right, Cindy?
Yes.
Yeah. So this morning we're going to enjoy a nice, rich session with these individuals. And we want you to know a couple of things. We have had an annual convention coming up in October, generally every year. And we have we're making some decisions about that convention coming up, whether we'll try to do another virtual online one due to the pandemic, or whether we're going to have a small gathering as well as virtual. So some things will be coming your way about that. And in addition, we're revamping our website. You might want to check out Misophonia Association in the next few weeks. We should have a new looking website up and running with more features and more conveniences, and that's exciting. And we will be having another misophonia clinic probably in June with different specialists. I was trying to think, Cindy, is this our third one or fourth? The third.
Is it the third?
The third one.
I think we're trying to do one for 3 quarters and then have the big annual meeting in October.
That's right. And so again, if you don't know me, my name is Marcia Johnson. I'm serving on the board, and I provide management strategies and sort of help organize this thing called the Misophonia Association. And I just would like everyone to know that we're really looking to represent you. We do accept donations, which we direct toward research, and we fund scholarships to our conventions. And it's just so exciting. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to our wonderful he's actually the secret boss of all of us. It's Troy Reisdorf, and he has some housekeeping little comments and tips for you. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Marcia. Yes, I will cover the housekeeping tips in rapid succession here so we can get on with the content that you all joined to consume and take advantage of. Right at this very moment, I turned on what's called the live transcript. The live transcript is an option to you. You can turn it on your end, and then if you want to turn off the sound, then you can still know what people are saying. So the live transcript is now turned on for your benefit. So I have three other things to mention. First is the Q&A feature. So the Q&A feature is turned on. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A feature. I will be looking at the Q&A questions and passing them through. But of course, many questions were submitted over the registration. So we are going to cover mostly questions that were submitted during registration. But still feel free to submit them into the Q&A, and we'll take a peek for them. All right, and then the chat feature is turned on. So the chat feature is for you to chat with one another. If you have a reaction to something is said, then you can chat that. Some people find that distracting. In that case, just don't have the chat visible on your screen. Okay, if you find it distracting, just make it go away. All right. And then lastly, the recording. This event is being recorded, like even as we speak. This event will go up on our YouTube channel in a couple of days for people to rewatch, or in the case that they didn't get to make it, to watch. All right, those are the housekeeping items. I would like to turn you over to, I guess, Cindy, to keep this show going. And if you have any administrative questions right now, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll take a peek and try to get those answered. But I'll be disappearing. Thank you.
Troy, don't forget your most important instruction to people not to eat or drink visibly on the screen, just to make sure people know.
That's right. We hopefully covered that on Tuesday night with all the panelists. Of course, the participants are invisible. Participants, you can do whatever you want, but panelists, yes, please, any sort of activities other than giving guidance about misophonia, mute yourself and turn off your camera. Thank you. Thank you, Marcia. Anyway, over to Cindy Simon. Cindy, you need to unmute and that will, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I never know what sound is in my house. Thank you.
There you go.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for giving us your Sunday. Thank you to our panelists who have volunteered their time, and thank you to everyone else joining us. Truly, without you, we wouldn't need to be here. I do want to make a comment on how far we've come. We've gone from a small group in the US to, I'd like to read the countries that people have signed in from. We have Australia, Canada, Germany, Greece, Iceland, India, Israel, Japan, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Puerto Rico, Russia, Sweden, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and United Kingdom. I would say that's a really impressive international array of participants. So thank you all for whatever ungodly hour you're up at for joining us here. And since we only have a couple of hours and tons of questions, I don't know we'll be able to get to all of them. So for those who haven't had their questions answered, I apologize in advance. I'd like to have our panelists give us a 3 to 5 minute introduction of who they are, what they do, where they are, etc. So why don't we start with Jolene, since you're first on my screen.
Okay, good morning. I'm Dr. Jolene Jaffe. I reside in Southern California. I've been working with people with misophonia online and in my office, not in my office now, but previously, for about 10 years. I've seen hundreds of people, I don't even know how many. And I use a protocol that I developed over time. It just evolved from starting with cognitive behavioral therapy, which I used with tinnitus patients, and then adding in DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy, adding in a lot of metaphor, a lot of stories, neuroscience, some humor, creativity, whatever it is that helps people learn how to identify and manage and in some cases tolerate the discomfort of sounds that are very disruptive to their neurological system, and working with some ways to turn down the volume on the neurological system. The hardest people that I find working with actually are the little ones, which is now more and more people because we're identifying it younger. It's hard on screen, but it's also hard because up until a certain point, it's very difficult for children and often many adults to get the idea that, you know, the thing that's wrong here is not actually that person making that sound. The problem is what happens when that sound gets into my neurological system. So even adults who are spending their lifetime being angry at everybody else for the things that everybody else is doing that are disruptive, if you keep waiting for somebody else to stop doing that thing that they do that is disruptive to you, to your neurological system, you got a long wait. So better to learn how to manage on your side of it, even though that makes you upset, even though you're angry that you have to do that, but that will help you get past the frustration of waiting for everybody else to stop doing those things. I don't name triggers, so I'm not saying right now for people to stop doing X, because I don't want to add to anybody's list of things they start looking for. Oh, I hadn't noticed if that thing bothered me. Let me check it out. So I don't ever name triggers. People tell me, but I don't tell them. And because I'm a licensed psychotherapist, I work with not just the emotional and the kind of neurological side of things, but also the family relationship side of things, which is very complicated, as you all know. So those of you who have family members with misophonia, you know how hard it is on them. Maybe you know that. You know how hard it is on you and on siblings. And so I work with the interpersonal family relationships as well as with the person and the situation itself. I get a lot of referrals from audiologists. Other people just find me, and that is what I do. And I'm located at sensitivetosound.com. And I think that's all I need to say for now. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Jolene. Let's go to Christopher Pearson next.
Thank you. Well, I'm Chris Pearson. I'm a neuropsychotherapist. I'm based in the north of England in the UK. I'm a member of a therapeutic community. There's a group of about 12 of us who share an approach to treatment of misophonia. And over many years, we've now probably worked with around about 3,000 individuals having misophonia. Period of time is probably about 12 years, I guess now. Marcia was saying earlier on how long we'd all been together in this endeavour. I think it's probably about 12 years. I publish work on misophonia, for instance, in the International Journal of Neuropsychotherapy, in Frontiers of Psychology. I'm a board member of the Misophonia Institute alongside Tom Dozier. And in 2017, I was invited to membership of the Royal Society of Medicine here in the UK. Unlike some others, I avoid using the T word. I don't like to talk about triggers in misophonia. I prefer to refer to them as cues, because I very much believe that our brains accept a cue, which then leads us to follow a particular neurological script. And I think that that probably defines the misophonia response rather better. I very much recognize misophonia to be a multisensory condition, and many of those we work with, of course, have auditory issues alongside visual issues, but very often also olfactory or smell and tactile or kinesthetic cues. So it's really quite a broad base. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, I'm a member of a group working together. We practice something which is known as sequent repatterning therapy. It was designed very much from the ground up to be a therapy for those having misophonia, rather than trying to squeeze misophonia into an existing therapy model. What we did was take misophonia for what it is and to create a therapy model to address that. With that, I will hand back to Cindy.
Thank you, Chris. Let's go to Ezra Cowan. Sorry, Megan, you're like on the bottom of my screen as it shifts back and forth.
Thank you, Cindy. My name is Ezra Cowan. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I live here in New York. I practice in I live in New Jersey. I practice in the New York, New Jersey region. I do a lot of work both in person and telehealth. I think the COVID era has ushered in a new frontier of access to working with people, and I think that's a good thing. In terms of my journey into the misophonia world, it started in graduate school when my wife showed me an article in a family magazine with someone describing having misophonia, and upon reading it, I realized that this is something that I started to do some research on it. It piqued my curiosity, and I realized that I was looking at a pretty small research base, and it really piqued my curiosity, and it pulled me, got the better of my curiosity, and I just started to immerse myself in trying to understand and make sense of this phenomenon called misophonia. And one of the reasons why I think I became very interested in it is because it seemed to, my background is, I was starting to specialize at the time in obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, and an area also associated with OCD called perfectionism, or other personality traits associated with perfectionism. And so what caught me in the literature was that there was a very strong general association with individuals who report having misophonia and also reporting higher levels of perfectionistic tendencies than the rest of the population. So my interest started from there, trying to understand what might be this relationship. And from there, I developed a model trying to understand misophonia. And then from that model, I developed a therapy. And the therapy is based on a lot of existing ideas. I like to say I'm only I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, people who've been doing this for many, many years. And I try to step back and make sense of everything in light of some powerful existing ideas that exist, and applying it to misophonia. And the main concept of the therapy is essentially trying to understand why exactly, from a psychological perspective, would somebody experience such a strong reaction and to specific everyday sounds from specific people. And what overall, I would say the thesis of the therapy and the approach is that we have a hard time, if something bothers us, we have a hard time learning to be okay with something that bothers us, especially with close family members. And so the goal is, so if there's a trigger, if there's something, I use the T word, I'm probably going to use it. I apologize if I wasn't aware that was that's just the term I use. But essentially, how do we learn to live with this, with the existence of something that really bothers us? That's probably not going to go away. And so the therapy is purely designed to address the factors that get in the way with learning to accept this reality. And it's a protocol that I would call it interpersonally informed. So there's an interpersonal element, acceptance-based, CBT. That's how I would structure it. It has an acceptance base, and there are cognitive behavioral aspects that we address each part of the person's cognition, the person's emotional world and behaviors, to enhance this way of learning that there's something out there that's very, very hard to live with, and how can we learn to live with it. And what I found is that leads to reduction in symptoms, learning how to deal with something that really bothers us without fighting, without trying to avoid it, without trying to change the situation. That could lead to a reduction of tension, reduction of awareness of the sound, and in general reactivity. So that's my work, and it's so exciting to be here. And I look forward to sitting here with this amazing group of thinkers and people who are looking to help the general population with suffering. So back to you, Cindy.
Okay, thank you. And last but certainly not the least, someone who's doing some amazing stuff with kids. We were talking about it the other day, Megan Bradshaw.
Good afternoon. My name is Megan Bradshaw, and I'm an audiologist. I work on the northwest side of Chicago for a non-for-profit hospital called Amita Resurrection Medical Center. I've been there over 27 years. I have an amazing team of other audiologists and doctoral students who work with me. We specialize in the evaluation, treatment, and management of different auditory and vestibular disorders. For those with misophonia, we look to evaluate their peripheral and vestibular systems, and we look to go ahead to rule out things like hyperacusis, as well as any vestibular issues. And we use what's called a video nystagmography, a VNG, and we make appropriate referrals. My background is that I specialized in internal head noise that bothers you, called tinnitus, for 20 plus years. and then had a colleague, a past former colleague who was nearing retirement, who had been specializing in this area, in the Chicagoland area, who was looking towards retirement, and asked if she could go ahead and refer these patients of interest to me. So I got a lot of support from my hospital and went ahead and did some national training. As well, I did and continue to do a lot of reading and education on any other possible things that can be helpful to my patients. So I utilize concepts of CBT within my counseling of discussion with patients and their families. I use a holistic approach and most often use specialized on-ear sound generators from the company Widex as a form of sound therapy for relaxation. And as well, it gives these individuals some auditory control of each of their environments, and combine this with different multisensory exercises and activities. I do have a background, 9 years of volunteering in youth ministry. I'm married to a minister. And so with that background, I like to have fun, change things up, the element of surprise, kind of working on that with parents. Encouraging things like regressive dinner, encouraging things like in the middle of dinner, stopping, hiding a gift card, and allowing them to kind of have a scavenger hunt in the house. That element of surprise can really help in regards to managing tough situations. As well, I feel a real strong sensitivity to the patient's families. I grew up one of 6 kids, and then I was 19, we adopted 3 more. So knowing how different issues within families can impact siblings is very important. So with that, I absolutely strongly encourage outside referrals to a great team of counselors in the Chicagoland area. As well, some of my patients have had used online services, I think with a couple of the specialists that are here today. I also work with a team of physical therapists, occupational therapists, and outside of our facility, there's a functional neurologist's office called the Neurologic Wellness Institute that I visited and got to understand more of what they do. And so we're able to make some cross referrals and see some improvements to quality of life and some decrease in symptoms that patients report. So I feel really blessed and privileged to have the opportunity to work with patients and their families in this regard to help them improve in some regards their quality of life. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we shall begin. For those listening in, we are not going to have a break here. So if you need to take a break, just pick up and go. You guys, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to have someone start, and then anyone else, as you finish, can come in. Please try it, since we do have so many questions. Maybe limit your answers to 2 to 3 minutes if possible. Okay. And the first one I'm going to start with is, how can we tell the difference between misophonia, a sensory processing disorder, and maybe even sensory issues related to being on the spectrum for autism? Chris, do you want to start with that?
I will do, yes. Thank you, Cindy. I think the answer to the question really is based on what we recognize as being typical of any of those conditions. I think sensory processing disorder is a condition that really affects how a person's brain processes sensory information, or stimuli as they're often more correctly called. So sensory information quite obviously includes things that we hear, as well as things that we see, smell, taste, or touch. And very often it is quite generalized, which misophonia is not. If we skip on to those on autistic spectrum, they very often have issues with essentially being overwhelmed by sensation. But very often that can be associated in the auditory domain by loudness and duration. And again, those are things that are not typical in misophonia. And I think that I have only touch the surface of those. I do recognize that, but I don't want to be talking for too long. In terms of how we recognize misophonia, it is very often about a specific or a number of specific sensory events. So they may be particular sounds, and those particular sounds may be sounds that are created by only particular persons or under particular circumstances. So very often we can find an individual who is only activated by a particular person making a noise, and others who do exactly the same thing don't have that same effect on the person. So I think one of the key criteria is that whether it is sound or another sensory stimulus, it is in misophonia likely to be very specific, and that it often, I think, also has a big impact on that person's core need for attachment, which is often why I think family relationships suffer. We also see in misophonia, I think, that there is an immediate physical reflex. Now, this is something that I know Tom Dozier highlighted a number of years ago, and I discovered it quite separately. That was really what brought Tom and I together, the physical reflex. But around about 90% of those that we see with misophonia also have that. So that really is not something that we'd expect to see in autistic spectrum or indeed with sensory processing disorder. The loudness of sound, the intensity of other sensations isn't usually significant in misophonia. In fact, very quiet sounds often and of limited duration will activate misophonia. There is a obvious dysregulation emotionally and with cognitive thought, but I think that probably applies to all three conditions that we're considering here. However, afterwards, most individuals with misophonia find that their emotional response was probably disproportionate to the event. They recognize it as being disproportionate, whereas I think with the other conditions, that's less likely. Something which is often experienced, I think, in all of them is avoidance. So that isn't a good way of checking to see whether it is one thing or another. But I think that probably covers most of the criteria that I would apply in determining whether it is indeed misophonia or a response down to another issue, another condition.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else want to jump in? Ezra, Megan, Jillian?
I would just add that, you know, an occupational therapist can be a good person too, just to look at the sensory processing disorder, if there is a concern in that, in addition to the misophonia.
Yeah, I think that really covers everything, even more than I would even consider. One aspect that I think just practically, if someone already has other symptoms of ASD, autism spectrum disorder, then I think that would be an important aspect to highlight, and just in terms of making the differential. If it's the only symptom, and there are no other ASD symptoms, it would be pretty hard. I think it would be I would be more apt to go in the misophonia route just from that data.
If I could just follow on that, Ezra, I agree with what you're saying there, and I think that certainly in clinical review, we have discovered that the incidence of ASD in the clients we see for misophonia is probably about the same as you would expect to find in the general population. So I don't see that there is a correlation between the two.
Okay, Jillian.
Just one brief comment. So thank you, Chris, for all of that information. There is, just as with misophonia not being in the code books, neither is sensory processing disorder. According to the world of diagnoses, there's no such thing yet. We all know there is, but it's not in the books yet. So if somebody goes to see a specialist of one sort or another, and the only reason to need a diagnosis officially actually is if you're planning to submit it to an insurance company and try to get reimbursed for a portion of the cost. Otherwise, there is no real useful purpose in a technical diagnosis anyway. But if you do need that, then the person you're seeing is going to have to diagnose it some other way. So some of the tendencies that we notice that go along with, such as OCD, that is in the books. Hyperacusis is in the books. Anxiety, which always accompanies, probably precedes, but also accompanies misophonia, that it has a code. And the audiologists can speak to this, but they have another code that they use that is called other auditory abnormalities. And they
abnormal auditory perception.
Okay, so there you go. So that could be used. But just to keep in mind that this is all an evolving science. So we don't really know for sure what the distinctions are in those disorders yet, or if they're related, or if they overlap, or if they're next door to each other in the brain someplace. That is not yet clear. I think the main thing to do is find some kind of an approach that is helpful to you, regardless of what the reason or name is that is put on it.
Thank you. So that will bring us to my next question then.
Cindy, I have one comment.
Okay.
I hope you don't mind. So historically, people, when they started coming in to clinics like mine back in the 90s with symptoms of misophonia, they were already tagged with a lot of other labels. Historically, people got all kinds of things. Whatever kind of clinician they visited, they were painted with the color of whatever conditions that clinician was familiar with, and people tried to figure out which one do you fit in closest. The problem with some of that is that then the methods for therapy that are associated with those different kinds of conditions were applied to these people, like excessive exposure therapy, like auditory integration therapy, like things that were not appropriate for misophonia. So I wanted to mention that it is important eventually to try to define and understand what the conditions are that warrants the diagnosis of misophonia. And the second thing I just wanted to say was that you asked the differences with autism and sensory processing disorder, whatever that might be, and misophonia. And the fact is, people have been working with autism for years and decades and a long, long time. And there are protocols for diagnosing, and almost always autism starts in early childhood, in preschool years. By the time you're a preschooler, you're usually identified. And sensory processing, as far as I can tell from my research, is about the same thing. People are born with this, or they develop it shortly thereafter. And they have symptoms. They walk on their tiptoes. They don't like labels on clothes. There's all kinds of associated symptoms for whatever that disorder might be eventually called. But misophonia has a unique characteristic, and this is really important, is these children, most of them, have absolutely normal developing milestones, perfect, smart, good in school, and misophonia hits like a lightning strike. A lot of people with misophonia can clearly remember the first time they found someone's sounds triggering for them. And so please pay attention to that in your own clinics, if you're a professional or if you're a person, and think back on those differences. Because to me, there's a huge, important marker there, and I'm not a research scientist.
Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next one. I have to make this quick comment. I do ask families if anyone else in the family has any sensory issues or other relatives or the immediate family, and you'd be surprised. I just recently had one mom telling me a different sensory issue for everyone in the family, but the child's reactions are exactly those for misophonia. So I'm not sure that it's as clear for me. So with that being said, let's go on to the next question. What type of specialist would you say is best to seek help with misophonia, or to start with? Is it the audiologist, the neurologist, the mental health professional? And I think I'm going to start with Megan on that one.
Sure. I feel very strongly multidisciplinary is what I have seen be the best. But at the same time, I don't want to see the patients feel overwhelmed. So there might be a season to do one thing and then another thing. These are active kids, busy schedules, just have a lot on their plates. But definitely what I have found is audiology wise, getting the on-ear sound generators on them, and the ones that I utilize have not just white noise, but fractal tones, which I can expand on later, but they really create this relaxation in the brain. And really, I find that a lot of any type of treatment that's looking for changing in thought patterns or just retraining of the neural pathways, I think it readies the brain, just calms the brain, the system down. And so I'm such a strong advocate of talk therapy and encourage that with each one of the patients. And it's hard to find people that have the specialty of misophonia, but I definitely encourage with the signed release, being able to share that information. But as well, I definitely think a physical therapist, occupational therapist, functional neurologist can all partake in the treatment, but again, probably not all at the same time.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think what Megan says regarding a multidisciplinary approach is absolutely key to success. I think that everything that we do, we try to borrow from as many approaches as we can, because we need to bring about that neural change, because it is a neural change that will fix the condition. Most other single modality treatments tend to soothe or assist with management, but so many management protocols, in my experience, promote avoidance. And I think avoidance is always something that we should reject, because essentially avoidance hands power to misophonia. I don't know whether the rest would agree with me there. I very much think that's the case.
Yes, I agree. It's a tough call with the finding a balance between, on one hand, making the client's the situation better, and which could involve avoidance for temporary accommodation. And at the same time, it's realizing that in the long run, when someone learns as a habit to not learn to deal with the sound, with, again, dealing with the sound could mean many things depending on what therapy route one goes. But if the temporary accommodation could have longer, it could slow down any long-term a therapy that one might be looking for. So there's no absolute answer, because sometimes one might not be in the right time to seek therapy. Maybe there are other aspects going on in the child or adult's life that's going on that it makes it difficult to seek any formal treatment protocol at that time. So it's always finding a balance between accommodation that involves avoidance and seeking therapy that doesn't involve avoidance. So that's how I would, building on Chris's point.
And the one thing I wanted to share is in wearing on-ear sound generators that are very specialized and have these fractal tones and then overlay of white noise and shaped noise, like we wouldn't ever avoid wearing glasses to see more clearly. So if you ever have a chance, read a book called Of Sound Mind, and it really just talks about the power of our sense of hearing. So in a sense, you're choosing, because we can't close our ears off like we can close our eyes off. So you're putting yourself, in my eyes, at an advantage to help manage the world better by decreasing the contrast, giving relief to the system, and then being able to work on these techniques that are being given to you to work on. So I definitely feel that some people wonder, are you going to be concerned about being addicted to these devices if you wear them? But again, we're not addicted to hearing, we can't stop hearing. So you're just getting to choose more what you're hearing or just decreasing the contrast of the unwanted sounds. So I see it as so much so that it puts these people at an advantage to managing their situations more. So much so that I ended up with these devices that I use. I have a family member that just has straight anxiety, and these devices were originally designed for tinnitus. And if you read the White X Zen manual, you'll kind of understand what the fractal tones are, and I can expand on that later. But I got a pair of these for my daughter, who it really benefited her relating to managing that. So I'm very thankful to see that there's some other off-brand benefits for it than what the original design was.
Although I would agree with almost all of what you've just said there, Megan, I think that we do need still to recognize that when we're dealing specifically with an auditory stimulus, shutting that out sometimes will drive that into a perception through another sensory domain. And I've clearly seen that occurring, where those who have an issue perhaps with eating sounds have had that shut out and have begun to adopt a similar response to seeing others eating. And you know, very often we can't really manage all the sensory inputs simultaneously. Again, as Ezra said, we need to make this something which is properly balanced. I think if we look at somebody's core needs, we see that very much almost as a Venn diagram. And as we're bringing these interventions in, we are overlapping the various core needs in different patterns. But I take exactly what both of you have said, and would like to always approach that with extreme caution. What really does concern me, though, is those who go to see a clinician, you know, a primary care physician perhaps, and everything that is done there after that is based on Dr. Google. And I know that sounds very trite to say so, but certainly here in the UK, many frontline physicians will Google misophonia as soon as a patient mentions it.
The one other thing I wanted to mention too is just how central gain works. So I know I've heard some people in emergency situations using earplugs, but being able to choose and fill your brain with positive auditory versus eliminate sound. When we eliminate sound, the brain becomes an amplifier and then turns up all sound sensitivity. So that's just an important thing to keep in mind. I'm not saying it's absolute never, but being very cautious, very select on more emergency basis to use any type of earplugs. You can use hearing protection that streams in positive sounds to make sure to help avoid that over the long term. And if it ever happens, it is something that's undoable, but it's not something that you want to have to deal with as well.
No, and I think the key word you used there, Megan, is the word choice, because that takes it into approach-based management rather than avoidance.
So with that, I think would everyone agree, is therapy worthwhile? And I do agree with Megan that it should be multidisciplinary, but I leave it to this panel.
Well, I wanted to just give another plug for a quick book that I've read. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, and I'm pretty certain it's not specifically to do with misophonia, but next to the Bible, it's the most powerful book I've personally ever read. And it really gives the value and importance of talk therapy. And so I do recommend this to every family, not to teenagers. If it's going to be a teenager reading it, I suggest they do it with their counselor or with their parents, just because some of the examples at the start are graphic. But I think it's a very powerful book to understand the mind and the ability of the healing aspects that can happen through so much of what can be done in therapy.
Okay. Anyone else? Chris? Jolene?
Is therapy useful? Absolutely. I think the combination, particularly between audiologists and therapists, is a great idea. Therapy of various sorts helps people learn about what's going on with them, what their reactivity is, what their personal emotional state is, and how that impacts the situation. I think therapy that includes other family members can be extremely useful. Maybe not every single week, but at least now and then. There was a question in the Q&A that I want to just slip into here because it relates, which is, why is it that people with misophonia are more reactive to close family members generally than other people? And I think that is it's an excellent question. I always ask people what they think about that first, patients that I'm seeing, clients, but my answer to that is multifold. One is, they're the people you see more often, probably. They're the people you're in most close physical contact with. They're also the people you're most irritated by, because how many times have I told you that that thing you're doing drives me crazy and yet you're still doing it? So there's a lot of resentment that gets built up along the way. I also add one more piece to that, which is, I think that the family is the safest place for people to have total meltdowns. It doesn't feel good to anybody in the family, but if they screamed at people at school, for example, they'd lose all their friends. If they scream at people at home, they're not as likely to lose their family. Maybe they will, but it's not as likely that their family is going to, throw them out on the street. So I think it's the safe place. After a full day of things building up, you come home and you just drop it on the nearest person or the person you encounter most frequently. So I think there are good reasons why it is that it's more common with family members than with other people.
As you began speaking there, Jolene, I wrote on my notes here, safety. I was pleased to hear you get to that. But not only is it a safe place to scream and to cry, it's also a place where we expect safety. And therefore, when we're challenged by something that activates an anxious or angry response, we feel even more let down than we do outside of that environment. So it's amplified in two quite different ways.
Okay, anyone else? Before I go to I think we can all agree it's helpful in a multidisciplinary approach. It's helpful to attack it from all ends. So that being said, there are a lot of questions that were all interrelated to the same thing. So I'm going to throw this out to everybody. I'm sure it could take us forever to answer this, and therefore I'm going to ask you to try to keep it contained. So in general, people want to know what's the current research, what are new approaches for addressing this in children and adults? What about the coping mechanisms? How do we calm them down, and should approaches utilizing medications be used? So I'm going to open it up to everybody who would like to go.
Well, I'd like to start by saying that in 2000, there were 2 published articles in peer-reviewed magazines or journals on misophonia. And in 2021, after an exponential rise, there were close on 100. So research is coming along and it is increasing exponentially year by year. So I think we know more about misophonia than probably we did before. Back in 2017, when Sukhbinder Kumar published A Brain Basis for Misophonia. That was really the first validated proof that misophonia is a neurological condition. Up until then, there have been many opinions, but I don't think anyone had any firm basis for that, which Kumar essentially began the process of settling. So in terms of therapy, in terms of things that we can do, I don't think at the moment there is a pharmacological route, or route, as I should say in this context, to fix misophonia in a way. We can downregulate symptoms with medication, but we can't bring about any change. I know there are some projects talking about using psychedelic drugs and ketamine, for instance, but none of those are practical on a day-to-day basis for most of those who are watching this webinar. So I think that we are looking at, as was introduced in the last question by Megan, multidisciplinary therapy to make a difference.
And the one thing that I'm finding in the platform that we have added due to my visit with functional neurology and seeing the tool they use is doing this thing called video nystagmography, where we look at eye tracking in different positions, following a light on a light bar, laying them down, head right, head left. And what we're finding is many of the patients, and again, I'm not a researcher, but there is some ways to help with this, show eye tremors, show disconjugate eye movements, show nystagmus in different movements. And so that's really what prompted my interest in why some people were traveling to different parts of the country to get help. And so I did my research in the Chicagoland area and really have been able to work closely with the Neurologic Wellness Institute, Dr. George Michaelopoulos, and really see what they do in regards to those abnormal results. And then they give exercises and then they track improvements over time that often functionally are reported as improvements. It does not necessarily mean the misophonia, but a lot of our patients that happen to have misophonia happen to have things like being clumsy or, basically having trouble focusing, brain fog. So as well, the one thing I was talking to him yesterday, George Michaelopoulos, and he definitely said the one common pattern he has been finding is that primitive reflexes that he works to rid of, and that he has seen functionally patients report improvements with their symptoms from that. So I definitely think those are areas that research needs to occur in.
So Megan, I had not heard of that, and I look forward to seeing more on that. Anyone else on current, new, what approaches adults, kids? Jolene.
I really appreciate keeping the people who keep track of the current research. I try, but I'm mostly working in the field rather than on the field. So I really appreciate that. The one area that I think is needed that hasn't been done yet to my knowledge, we have a current ongoing research about what it is and where it is. So they figured out, yes, it's a real thing. Yes, it's neurological. It's located in this particular area of people's brains that have misophonia. They all have the same thing. So yes, it's a brain thing in a particular area. So, but that does not explain why. It doesn't explain why some people have that situation. It doesn't explain why it gets turned on at a particular point, as Marcia was pointing out earlier, at a particular age frame, or there is no understanding yet about that. And I think that it's possible, one of the questions that was asked in the Q&A had to do with, is this related to PTSD? Is it related to something going on in the family? The best answer that I have for that is maybe. And PTSD, by the way, does not necessarily mean a major trauma such as a car accident or being kidnapped or held up at gunpoint. There are things that are traumatic to people that don't look like it to somebody else, but because of their maybe highly sensitized neurological system, for whatever reason they have that, they have stronger reactions to something that other people in their family don't understand. What is that? Why is that? Why are they having that reaction? So I'm looking forward to the research that looks at the epigenetics in addition to the genetics. Like, what is it in the person's wiring that sets this in potentially in place? And what is it in the person's environment that maybe flips a switch that actually causes it to start being reactive? We don't know the answer to that yet.
I think you're absolutely right, Gillian, that the event, the sensitizing event, if that's what you're going to call it, can be something in children that seems quite inconsequential to adults. And I've had experience with particular clients who began the process following what was really just a very unguarded glance from a caring adult. And yet that to them was quite traumatic in that moment. But I think also your point about the epigenetics of this is quite important. I mean, certainly in some quarters, the TNM2 or 10M2 gene has been lauded as being the misophonia gene, but it does seem to be associated with implicit memory processes. And therefore, I think that those who are more likely to have misophonia are probably more likely to develop those schemas than those who don't. But having the gene switched on doesn't mean that any person is going to have misophonia. It just means that they're probably have more potential to develop it.
And yeah, just to add to what Jaylene and what was saying before about the aspect of it being a neurological, we do have evidence regarding this having a neurological basis, and I think that a Kumar study was watershed in that regard. I think one of the important aspects is to realize that when we look at many conditions, such as any psychological condition, for example, you're going to find a brain basis for it. It just doesn't explain why, in the first place, these conditions have arisen. There has to be, in order for us to function, we have a physical, organic kind of vessel to hold our experience, and that's the brain. So it would be expected to see the sort of the footprint of these experiences in terms of the differences. At the same time, it doesn't explain where we go from there. And the rest, everyone's sort of in the same, everyone's looking at it and saying, well, why are we here in the first place? So it is very powerful to see that in a measure that we could see, we could assess these type of, that this is a real condition, and that's critical. At the same time, it still doesn't add to the question as to why, as much as you could develop a theory within that. And at the same time, that theory is not necessarily stronger than other theories. So I want to kind of take a step back. I've noticed in the field, there's a very strong push that this is a neurological condition. And I don't know if that's fully true, as much as like OCD being a neurological condition. Some people say it's a psychological condition. Some people say neurological. Some people, you could say it many different ways, but at the end of the day, nobody knows for sure. And we know that certain conditions, the most effective treatment is going to be a more organic medication approach, and some are much more effective by a psychological approach. So I think we still don't know, and I urge everyone watching to sort of not jump into one, assume that whatever you think it is the whatever you identify is going to be the absolute correct approach.
Yeah,
Colleen.
the one thing I wanted to share is that I always do want to see the emotional piece addressed. One of the most powerful things I had ever been told in my life is anger can be tears turned inward. And so I see many patients that don't get to put a voice to what their experience is, and they turn to tears. And when they get given that opportunity, whether it's in audiology or in a psychotherapy office or with a parent or with a friend, where somebody can empathize and understand, that's part and as I see it very strongly, of the healing journey. That's a huge piece of it.
Okay. Jolene, you wanted to say something? Oh, I thought you had your hand up before. Okay, so we
I had
talked.
my fingers up. I was saying it's perhaps.
Oh, I
Oh,
thought there was.
All right.
That you wanted to put something in there. Okay, so, you know, we heard what you said, and it was more on research, what we know, what we don't know, what we need. But people are still asking for approaches and coping mechanisms. And I know everyone has their own way of looking at it. So I would like to go back and address that a little from each of you. And maybe tell us if it's general or if it's one for children, one for adults, maybe it's one for young children, one for young adults, and one for adults. So I throw it open to you. Who would like to start?
I could start, if that's okay. So I think that one thing that I want to, I guess from my perspective, I don't know if there's going to be like a good nugget to walk away with and feel like this is, well, on one hand we have tremendous advancements in in misophonia research. At the same time, we're still learning a lot. And misophonia is an incredibly difficult condition for the individual, for the suffering individual, and the entire family. So it's really a family. When it involves a child, it's really a family condition in that regard. It's a family unit issue. So with regard to the therapy approach, I guess there's one way to, everyone has, I can only speak for the approach that I use. And so I'll share a little bit about it. And I think that sometimes it could be useful, and just in terms of applying the philosophy of it and bringing it into the home. I see the issue with what gives rise to misophonia. Again, this is from a theoretical perspective, with practical implications. In theory, what I believe the issue to be is that, I'll give a metaphor, but I'll give an example. Imagine someone, he comes into the house and he can't stand that the floor is messy. It bothers him. Why can't people? It makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't like the floor's messy. So family says, okay, we'll try to clean up the floor, and then comes back, floor is clean. Comes back 2 days later and the floor is messy again. So it's like, I asked for the floor to be clean. Can we please clean the house? And so this family happens to be messy. That's just their natural tendency. They are messy people. Let's just say in objective terms, messy, whatever messy is. And one of the children is very, very orderly, does not like a mess and finds it very difficult. At the same time, it's sort of like, well, on one hand, you have a very messy family. On the other hand, you like to have things orderly. What should happen? So maybe we could try to change people's behavior to become more orderly, so that the suffering individual, the orderly individual, feels more comfortable. And so maybe they will go on some type of track and say, okay, well, everyone will learn how to be more orderly. And this gives a sense of like a hope, okay, maybe things will get better. And then boom, a week later, things are messy again. And this is sort of the pattern that we see with misophonia, where there's like, okay, we'll try to accommodate, and then boom, the triggering behavior is back, the eating with the mouth, whatever it is. I apologize for using as an example, but there's gonna, that thing which you don't want is always going to show up again. And so what I've found is that there's this tendency to almost hope or expect or hope that the thing that is triggering will go away. And I find that that hope and expectation is incredibly debilitating, because you're hoping for something that's literally never going to change. The way a person eats, the way a person does things is just sort of their habit. It's just the way I often give an example. I said, you take a guitar string. The guitar string is pretty rigid overall, and it can move a little bit. It's flexible a bit, but when you let go, it kind of goes right back to where it is. And people are like that. We could try to change our behavior a little bit, but for the most part, we kind of just stay the way we are. And that's true for all the habits. And so what happens when someone's born into a family or into a reality where they find something very, 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 very unsettling? For whatever reason why they found it unsettling, I don't know. I don't know. That's a question that there's ideas, but the fact is we kind of are finding a situation where person A makes person B very uncomfortable. And so because when the person who's very bothered by something is going on this almost like a sense naturally, how can I make myself better? It always starts with, can we please stop these things out here? And because that's never going to change, everything turns towards the suffering individual saying, look, you know, this thing that we're looking to change, this idea that somehow this person out there is going to change, the family is going to change, is something that actually is the equivalent of, pardon this analogy, I use it to bring out a point, as someone who passed away and we're hoping that person just gets out of the grave and comes home. That's probably not going to happen. And if we hope for that, that's going to lead to a lot of frustration, disappointment, and prolonging of hurt. So let's see what we could do.
Wait, you mean Elvis isn't coming back?
Oh, that's a separate question. That is.
Sorry, my humor.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Everyone but Elvis. But I think the idea that we're on a cognitive level now, this I think also sheds a little bit on answers, kind of sheds a little bit light on understanding the interpersonal aspect, where there's higher expectations from family members to be able to stop their behavior, as was mentioned earlier. So there is more of a sense of control within that environment, and therefore it's harder to give up that sense of something out there is not going to change. So everything, and at the same time, I think it's important for the family to be incredibly compassionate and understanding that this person is going through suffering, that their behaviors are bringing about a lot of suffering inside of them. So it's kind of a group effort in that regard. On one hand, the suffering, the individual with misophonia has to learn through a set of techniques and a regimented approach that's creative. It's not like prescriptive, but how do we bring that idea home that this thing is not going to change? And at the same time, the family is not like, this is your problem, like, you know, we're going to continue doing what we're doing, because that's not helpful either. So that's sort of the one approach that I want to share, that I wanted to, you know, an approach that's available.
Okay, thank you. Chris.
I think that Ezra is absolutely right. We can't make everyone else change. And if I have an issue with others eating crunchy vegetables, I can implore them to not eat crunchy vegetables. But if I have an issue with their breathing, it's a very big ask. So I think that the question began about therapy, and you brought us into your realm, your approach. The therapy that we offer, which we call sequent repatterning, begins by creating what I always refer to as a perimeter of safety. Whatever else is happening in that person's life, we have that perimeter of safety that surrounds what we're doing. And that gives us all kinds of advantages while working with emotions, with limbic processes, subconscious processes, whatever you want to call them. We discovered a long time ago, before 2012 even, that long ago, that those who had hypnotherapy when they had misophonia very often would come to the end of a session feeling very much better. In fact, some reported that they thought they'd been cured. The problem was that it didn't endure. But that gave us a very clear indication that if we could use deep, focused relaxation within that realm of safety, we could begin to address the issues themselves. That was really where the therapy framework began, that we could create somewhere where a person's misophonia is not activated. We also discovered very clearly in using hypnosis that hypnotic hallucination, asking somebody to hear sounds, asking them to see things, would enable them to manage their experience in a very rich way, but nevertheless to never be overwhelmed by those experiences. And that's really where the therapy took us. Now, it varies absolutely. Every individual has a different experience of what we do for obvious reasons, but that was where it began. I hope that comes close to answering what was the initial question. I see Marsha waving.
I want to simply chime in. I am completely filled with a sense of gratitude listening to you. I was thinking back to 1997, 98, 99, 2000. Honestly, I was thinking of the 10, 15 years I spent, and I'm just absolutely in awe of everything that all of you know. And I'm absolutely in awe of the fact you're willing to come on here free of charge, participate, share your knowledge with hundreds of people around the world. And I'm just proud of everybody. And I just want to do a little cheering for you and what we know now and how proud I am to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you for saying so, Marsha. Absolutely.
Okay, anyone else?
Sure.
Megan, do you want to
Yeah.
talk about noise generators?
Sure, I'll just share just a few tips before that. A couple of the things I encourage parents to do is to be a student of their child, to understand personalities. Another plug for a great book that I love is called The Road Back to You. And that's the Enneagram, kind of understanding some of the personality traits and how they relate to others. Understanding HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So when you know your child hasn't had a good night's rest, what other ways can you help them? Something we did in our own family that I encourage families to do is ask everybody, including mom, dad, if grandparents live, each child, that if you could implement 2 to 3 rules, what would they be? And it could be as simple as don't leave your dirty socks around, as I would request, or don't come to me for tech help. And when it goes both ways, so other family members, siblings feel like they're being asked. When I have a playlist asked to utilize in hard areas in the family involving music, I ask the individual that has the misophonia to create the playlist and then go to their siblings and ask them to buy in on what ones they like. And so everyone on the list, the patient with misophonia likes, and then the siblings get to choose what ones they don't want or they do want. So that helps. And then just to summarize on the on-ear sound generators, we go with what the brain likes. So because the company Widex has both white noise, shaped noise, and fractal tones, I find that it is the company that offers the widest variety of options. If somebody says they don't like fractal tones, and I really have not come across that but once or twice in all of my patients that I have seen, I go with Widex because of that. I have no personal connection to the company, but I find it is the best resource tool. They direct connect to iPhones and now many Android phones as well. So they do double as Bluetooth devices, which is an added bonus. That's not the reason that we utilize them. So the fractal tones basically they get to pick genres with us. We give them as many as 5 different programs. And for children, we have access through a little remote control, so you do not need a smart device, and that I'm able to get complimentary with each set of devices. And so for schools, when you're not allowed to have your smartphone out, that works really well. And then what are fractal tones? So fractal tones, first of all, they're a novel stimuli that have a relatively stable tempo and tonality. They have enough newness in them that there's not predictability, but then there's variety. So basically it creates this relaxation to the brain. And with the fractal tones, you can overlay white noise in some and not white noise in the other. And you're able to not, although it doubles as a hearing aid, and it is a form of aiding the hearing system, the microphones can be turned off in all the programs that they're going to use. And then what's nice is that when they return, we data log. And so we can tell on average how long they're using them and which programs they like. And truly, I see, 16 hours a day, some of the kids wearing them, even adults wearing them. So I ask no less than 2 hours a day in the first year of use, but children that are having challenges at school really take to these very, very well. And like I said, after a year of using this with my patients with misophonia, I ended up getting my own relative one, and they love them. They do come in rechargeable. All the companies, pretty much, you can choose a rechargeable option or not. You can sleep with them, but I do recommend instead, there's a soft band that you can get. I know I was looking it up, Cindy, Dr. Simon and I were talking, that's a headband, soft headband with built-in signals. So that is a nice option for sleeping as well.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Just to add to Megan's a quick comment, I'm also a big fan of Whiting's devices. Neither of us are paid by this company, so let me make that disclosure. They just seem to work well, but for those who don't like that, and I do have a few who do not like fractal tones, don't like the other sounds, but have found there's another company, Oticon has these ocean noises, which are the second favorite that I found that people like. And then Signia also has a number of different sound options as well. So there's more than one company that could be used. I actually try them on people and ask them which one makes them the happiest. So, but again, not alone, but in conjunction with the mental health professional as well, working with them.
I saw a question in the chat that's just asking some of the panels suggesting, like, does family not try to do things that would bother a patient with misophonia? And my theory personally is that I want the home life to be as free of challenges as possible, because typically the real world for those patients is very, very challenging. So the more empathy that they feel and creative solutions that are found. So whether or not it's eating dinner where the parent doesn't eat dinner, but the child eats dinner, but you're still there, so they're not feeling isolated, or siblings swap. So today, the person who doesn't have misophonia gets to go eat dinner by the TV, and the patient with misophonia sits at the table, but others are not eating. So I try to just encourage creative solutions. And then I think over time, I've seen quite a few of my patients say, they're ready, they choose to do that, but not asking them to do that because they're basically often feeling like they need to have that safe haven place. And that's part of why things like requesting for college, your own room where you have that safe haven place to go and reset your mind, things like that. I ask for those types of accommodations.
And I do that too. So if no one else has any more, I'm going to go on to the next one. This was also
if I
pretty...
could just, before we do, Cindy, if that's okay, we're plugging books. And just to prove this is a real background and not a Zoom artifact, this book, Parts Work, An Illustrated Guide to Your Inner Life, is a wonderful book for understanding what creates many of these feelings. it's got pictures on every page, which I like. You can see how well thumbed my copy is, but it's also quite cheap, available on Amazon. And I think that there are some activities in here as well that a lot of families might find a benefit.
Great. So we kind of want to clarify. People have been asking, is misophonia associated with stress and gets worse because of stress? Is there an association between misophonia and being bipolar, misophonia and OCD, misophonia and schizophrenia? Anyone want to talk about the associations? Or I would question, is any of it association by being guilty to have some similar symptoms, but not really? Ezra, you want to address the OCD connection there?
Yeah, I guess I could jump in. I mean, regarding the other bipolar schizophrenia, I'm not familiar. It doesn't ring a bell in terms of the literature base. I mean, you're going to find any condition comorbid at some percentage in the literature. At what point does it become significant enough? I would say OCD also is pretty low. It's not significant. The most prominent salient comorbidity in the literature is originally found in 2013 by the Schroeder study. It was between misophonia and obsessive compulsive personality tendencies, or I think it was even for disorder. And then subsequently, that finding has been pretty consistent. Some research finding that up to 97% of individuals reporting misophonia symptoms also report clinical levels of perfectionism. So that to me is the most prominent relationship, and also kind of, as mentioned earlier, requires some type of explanation. And so with that regarding OCD specifically, I don't see a strong relationship, and I do see these as sort of distinct from one another. In terms of, I would add, I could make a comment a little bit about understanding what might be the relationship between the comorbidities, because we're talking about comorbidities. So I would say, just to also with this explain why I believe OCD and misophonia are two disparate conditions, because this comes up a lot. This is a common question. And so I would say, just to kind of take a step back, is to think what exactly is OCD quickly and what is misophonia from from just like looking at it. OCD involves an anxiety of, generally speaking, of some type of fear happening in the future. Something unwanted might be happening, and those are obsessions regarding what if I touch the doorknob and there's COVID on it, and then I will get sick, and there could be all sorts of undesired outcomes. And then there are what we call compulsions that involve to get rid of those, of that vulnerability. So it typically involves a future-oriented issue. Misophonia, however, relates to right now in the present. And to kind of bring this out a little bit more, imagine someone who is experiencing unwanted thoughts about possible harm, is very uncomfortable, and so there are compulsions to sort of get rid of that state of discomfort. Imagine if one day this person finds out that there's a person out there that has a button that they press, and every time they press that button, the unwanted thought pops in their head. So now, not only are they experiencing OCD thoughts, but they're also, someone else is is controlling those thoughts. And so now the nature of the situation changes a lot. Now it's not just like a thought, but someone else is bringing this thought onto me. So now there's probably going to be some anger and frustration, if not way more than that, in the moment. Now, to broaden this, let's imagine this other person's breathing causes me to have this uncomfortable thought, a thought about an OCD type of thought. So that would also be, I mean, that would be problematic also. This other person is causing, so I would ask that person, look, would you please stop doing that? It really causes these uncomfortable thoughts. Now, what happens if that person who's breathing is your mother? Now it's a whole, so now my mom, every time she breathes, I start to have these really these thoughts about me getting COVID, and then now I have to feel like I have to do those compulsions. Instead of me doing these compulsions, I'll ask mom, look, I love you, you love me, can you please stop breathing in that specific way? And so I would say that OCD is sort of, if we want to compare and contrast, OCD is sort of where the thoughts are essentially emerging from within one's own experience. The cause, so to speak, is coming from certain non-interpersonal events. And misophonia involves other people who are perceived to be the ones who are causing it, and it feels that way, and so hence the anger and frustration. So they're both very different conditions in that regard. I hope that clarified the relationship there.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, to that group, if anyone has any answers of a relationship to schizophrenia or bipolar, I want to add ADHD, because some were wondering if you take the meds for ADHD and it relaxes and it makes you relax into it, would it also help misophonia? So anyone else?
I at least wanted to share a quick thing. This is anecdotal, but my clinical experience over the last 7.5 years, the biggest tie-in I would say out of the majority of my patients is their bright success. And so that perfectionism thought that was mentioned earlier to me would sound like a possible strong tie-in, but just the brightest, just well-rounded, just involved in so many things. That's probably the biggest common thread that I have personally seen in my patients with this.
Okay, Jolene, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm going to be off video for a moment, but I will answer that. I contrary to Dr. Cowan, I see a lot of OCD-ish relationship, not saying that one causes the other, but that they co-occur, at least in my personal experience with people. I start out with one of the early things that I do with clients is I go down a list of, here are some things that very well might be true for you. You tell me if they are. It's kind of a checklist from my personal experience. I actually haven't seen this in the literature anywhere, research anywhere, but here are some things that people that I've seen seem to have in common. One of them is what Megan just mentioned, Dr. Bradshaw. People with misophonia, I start to say tend to be, but I cross out tend to be. They are smart. They're very intelligent, bright people, which my suspicion is that there's something that goes on with, let's say, neural overactivity that perhaps is related to misophonia, but it's also perhaps related to many more neural connections that create much more breadth of intelligence, ways of thinking about things. I also ask people initially, is this you? And I'll describe some perfectionistic types of behaviors. And that's almost always true, not always, but almost. And then I will ask them about some OCD-ish kinds of things, which are similar, but not exactly the same. And many people say, yes, that applies to them as well. So I think they co-occur many times. They may or may not be exactly related, but I think maybe they're next door neighbors in the brain or something like that. They tend to be, I tend to treat all of that at the same time because I'm working with anxiety along with everything else, and anxiety seems to be core. It's either a cause or an effect or both related to misophonia and also related to other things. I think when we can't control our inner world, we try to control the things around us or the people around us. So that may be where that pops in. Yeah, that there's a way to, I'm trying to manage my world externally because there are many things I cannot manage internally. And I often end up at some point giving people a prescription, a request that they try this. Think of something where you have a way that you do it, that it's the right way according to your rule book, how you put things in the closet, how you organize your books, whatever it is, something that you do what feels to you like the right way to do it. And you're upset when somebody messes it up, like somebody puts the book back in the wrong place, or they put your shirt in the wrong place in the closet. And I ask them, stay in control of the issue, but at the same time, you pick something that you're going to intentionally do wrong, quote, wrong, and then see if you can stand it being wrong. See if you can tolerate it for, a few minutes or half a day or whatever it is. See if you can stand it being wrong according to your rules, and ask yourself, does that change the course of the planet? Is anybody's life in danger? Personally, the only two things I've come up with where perfectionism is absolutely essential are those two things we always say, like, well, it ain't rocket science. Well, it ain't brain surgery. I think those are the two places where absolute perfectionism is essential. And other than that, it is helpful to some people, but I would like to help them see that it is not essential and that they can tolerate things being imperfect, at least for a while, which if you can get to the point where you can tolerate it being imperfect for a while, maybe you can get through whatever that momentary situation is that is troubling to you and get to the other side of it, because perhaps that sound or that activity that's bothersome to you will stop within a short period of time and you can tolerate it. I'm going to stop and go and read. There's some comments in the chat, so I'm going to go and look at those. So that's my.
When you read the question to begin with, Cindy, the first, I think, criterion that you mentioned was stress.
Yes.
All of the other words related to some kind of issue or condition, whereas stress is something that comes to us as a response. And really, it is our response to stressors, I think, that does influence misophonia. Any of us that are stressed in life immediately have an activation in parts of our brain that are non-conscious. Everybody knows the amygdala is, at the very heart of this, but we have existing higher levels of stress hormones circulating, and those will make any kind of anger, any kind of rage, any kind of aggression far worse. And very often I am trying to explain to clients that when the misophonia activation takes place, those stress hormones come up to about here. Even if you're just looking at adrenaline and cortisol, they take hours before they ever return to normal. And if they're just about halfway down and there's another activation, now they're up here. And another activation and they're way over the top, to the point where if it begins to have a detriment to being able to sleep properly, that isn't surprising, but it's physiological. It's nothing to do with having misophonia per se. It is about how our bodies work. So in that instance, I guess we'd be looking at ways of managing stress better rather than perhaps addressing misophonia head on.
I want to contribute to this discussion. I like this question. Someone has asked, when did the symptoms onset in children? Well, the most common time is between ages 9 to 13. It's most commonly in the time of puberty. So I myself believe it has some relationship to this. The second point I'd like to add is we're talking here today about two different things, which I always find fascinating. Most of the people that have misophonia or have a family member or a loved one with it, they want to know very much what to do about it. I want to know what to do with the symptoms that I'm experiencing. I want to stop this phenomena. I don't like having it. What can you tell me that's effective? And then there's the whole other aspect that we hear today off and on is the scientific thinkers are also interested in what's the origin? What is the mechanism? What are the base roots of this disorder and how many other things are mixed up in it? And one thing I would like to offer is I have watched these patients now for 25 years. The first ones I encountered are now close to 50. There is an age-related change in how they handle misophonia. Younger children, I would suggest even before 18, handle it as an emotionally distressing situation. And there's that strong feeling that they try to control their environment. They're going to control the things that are bothering them. I always call it the yellow jackets that are stinging them. They're going to try to stop the yellow jackets. And as they age and they move through their 20s, they develop a different feeling toward misophonia, and their maturing brains understand slowly that other people maybe are not doing this on purpose, and that they can take actions and activities to help counteract the effects. And the third point I would just like to bring up, and this has not been studied yet, but I think what we're going to find in the future, people with misophonia are triggered thousands of times more every day than they react to. I've done experiments with teenagers, for example, sitting in my clinic room, and I've had them raise their finger like this when they feel a trigger, something has triggered them. And it's astonishing. It's absolutely flat out astonishing because their parents and families are watching and they cannot believe the number of times that these individuals are being triggered and withstanding a response. They're not going to respond. There's a level at which where they blow over. But I wanted to mention these things because when we talk in misophonia clinics like this, we do want to find out what is the cause. How is it related to other things? But we also want to always remember that the people watching and listening here want to know, what can I do today? What can I do about this amygdala? Can you take it out? Chris, can you just amputate it? What can we do?
We certainly can't remove it. And those who have an amygdala which is not functional usually don't survive particularly long. It is an essential part of our response to the world around us. So what we need to do quite clearly, Marcia, is to moderate its response. And to do that, we need to engage neuroplastic change. I think that exactly what Ezra said earlier indicates that misophonia becomes established through a process of neuroplastic change, unwanted, but nevertheless it is neuroplastic change, and remediating it requires the same process but in a managed way.
Okay. Yes, Jolene.
To go to two things that were said. One, Cindy, you asked about ADHD. I think a lot of kids may be misdiagnosed ADHD because there are these things they keep reacting to in the classroom. They're not concentrating, they're not paying attention because of things going on around them that are disruptive to them. It may be that they are actually don't have ADHD. Maybe they do, but maybe they don't. To go to Marcia's question about practical applications, what can people do? I mean, I have a huge toolbox of things that have evolved over time. Some of them have been mentioned by other people here today. that I use, that I teach people, do this, try this. There are a number of techniques or tools that come from DBT that help calm the neurological reactivity. So here's one. We can all do this together. All of you online can do this together. You inhale. We'll do it with 5. Inhale 5, exhale 7. So just do it, and then I'll tell you what you're doing. So inhale 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 7, 2, 3, 4. Okay, what you just did, the numbers don't matter. If you exhale more than you inhale, it begins to shift your brain from the reactive sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic, which is the calm down. It changes the ratio of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the brain, which causes that to automatically happen. It's a very easy, simple tool. I teach it to children all the time. I call it magic breath. It's called something else in the literature. Here's another thing that I show.
So Jolene, I just have to cut in for a second. I use that with every patient and I show them how to do it. And 100% of the time they tell me that they feel like their head's in a better place. So
Yeah.
I just want you to know, I learned well from you.
Thank you. It works instantly and efficiently, and you can do it anytime, anywhere, because all you're doing is breathing. It doesn't matter what you inhale, just exhale more. Do that a couple times. Another very specific tool that I use, I have this little drawing I keep right here by my computer here. I have people draw this. I have them draw it in pieces without the labels, but it's on my website. It's called chain analysis, coming from DBT. But let's assume you've got this kind of a vulnerability for some reason, which we're not going into because we don't really know. But when a trigger sound comes in, or a cue, as our colleague here would call it, the person goes automatically, it's a reflex to go into a reactive state. It's like the doctor hits your knee and your foot jumps up. You didn't cause your foot to jump up. Your neurological system did that. So you automatically go up here to a reactive state, that's a stormy cloud. You have an explosion, a meltdown, whatever it is. If you can back yourself up here, eventually to the point where you don't even have to go here, maybe, but at least back yourself up here to this point and go this way. This is a response rather than a reaction. And you can begin to train yourself over time how to make that right there, that spot, just a little nanosecond longer, so that you can, in fact, calm yourself down, take that couple of those breaths, learn a number of tools for refocusing your attention. If you do the muscle relaxation, focus on physiological symptoms kind of thing, you can check into the part of your body that's doing this, whatever it is, and consciously let that go. You can go the other path then to a response rather than a knee-jerk reaction. I have hundreds of tools like that. So people need strategies. There are plenty of them out there. You have to start by acknowledging that the problem is something that I have to address, because I can't wait for everybody else to stop doing the thing they're doing that I hate. I have to figure out how to address it myself. So in my neurological system, so that I can deal with the world out there. I want to say one other thing that Megan said earlier, Dr. Bradshaw said earlier about the family accommodating. I know many families where mom and dad have different ideas of how to deal with this. Typically, sorry to make this generalization, but in my experience, typically, mom is trying to find out what's going on. She's online. She's in the Facebook Parents of Children with Misophonia group, which if you're not, go join it. She's trying, and dad is saying, I don't know, I think it's a manipulation. I don't think we should accommodate. We got to toughen her up. She's got to deal with the world out there. She's going to run into these things, so she ought to practice dealing with us. And I don't see any reason that I need to stop eating whatever the heck it is that I eat while I'm watching TV in my own house that I paid for the roof and I paid for the TV. And You know, she's just being extreme, reactive, and mom, you are coddling her. I don't think we should be accommodating her. I want to go to what Dr. Bradshaw said. You want your home to be the safest place there is. It's a compliment to you that your children melt down at home. It means they feel safer to do it there than somewhere else. It doesn't mean you like it. It's unpleasant as all get out. And when they scream at you and call you names and slam the door and hit you and things like that, if that's what they're doing, of course you're going to take it personally. Don't take it personally. Calm yourself down, take a step back. It's the condition, it's their reactivity that's doing this. A little while later, they calm down, they come back, and they feel terrible that they said or did those things. So it isn't personal, even though it feels personal. I totally agree with Dr. Bradshaw. The home environment should be as safe and as accommodating as possible while learning tools to manage the rest of the world.
I think also, Jolene, that the parents could do with doing breathing at that point too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have a small booklet here of 3 breathing activities, one of which is very similar to yours. I wonder whether I could drop that into the chat and share it with everybody. Would anybody object to me doing that?
Feel free.
I don't know whether this will work, but I will. It may be that, no, we don't seem to have document sharing enabled. So no, I can't do that, but maybe
Well,
Troy.
Christopher, can you send us the link and we'll put it on the Misophonia Association Facebook page so everybody can get it.
Okay, just a moment. It is actually in my personal Dropbox, but what I can do is copy that Dropbox link, which I've just done, and I think I can probably paste that into chat. So anybody that wants that should be able to download it from there.
I wanted to just share that with these techniques, Dr. Jaffe was talking about, a lot of times, depending on the age of your child, practicing them outside of a triggered situation and really getting those skills honed on. That's why the body keeps a score, befriending their body, understanding what that fight or flight feels like and how to calm their system down. That's why even things like exercise, yoga, stretching, the full progressive muscle relaxation head to toe, so that when you're in a live situation, you can hone in on that area that you're really feeling that reflex in your body. So the more you get the skills outside of the challenging situation, so kind of having some silly role playing and say, what are we going to do now? And really practicing that really can help them then in the live situation. One last thing, Dr. George Michelopoulos mentioned too, for related to visual, getting calming glasses. These days, most of us with screen time use blue light glasses, but he did mention rose-colored, pink-colored, and light green can really help related to just calming glasses or anxiety suppression. So for those visual issues, that may be something that can be tried.
So Megan, I tried that with a lot of kids, and I'll never forget a 16-year-old who told me that just having those there separated her from what was bothering her and was helpful. So I use it as fun retail therapy after a visit. Time to go shopping. The deal is you have to pick sunglasses that are on sale or whatever. So, and there are, by the way, everyone, if you didn't know, Bose has noise cancellation sunglasses. So all the sound comes here. So if you're going to use sound therapy, their ears are not blocked, because I try to never block ears. So if we're talking about that, there were some questions about, are white or pink noise devices available on the market, as well as wondering, do you manage using these devices? Are they enabling and have the potential to worsen things? And furthermore, if so, do you hold off with children on ear level devices until they've tried other things? So I'm going to start that one off with Megan.
Yeah, I'm a strong advocate in regards to as young as able, in a sense. Again, our hearing sense 24/7. And so giving them that opportunity to have some onboard control, and the tips that we utilize are very open. And again, I don't just use the white noise or shape noise, which you can kind of shape like the pink noise. So you have the opportunity to allow it to be what's pleasurable for their brain. And so I don't feel that you have to wait to a certain age to get them, but definitely it's something that, you know, I've seen as young as 4 years old see benefits in. Not necessarily was it misophonia, they may have been more for an overall sound sensitivity, but any age I think really can see good value in them. And as I mentioned, other companies manufacture these on-ear devices, plus you can get like ones that you sleep with that have a variety of different types of noise, and it's just where the energy is shaped. In my eyes, it's not to say that one is better than the other. Certain people believe that your cues maybe needed more high frequency emphasis. In audiology, if ever we felt like there was a particular frequency spectrum that you wanted to have covered over, we do have the ability called speech mapping, and where we can do live testing of those cues without you present, and then show where the devices are covering up to. So that is within possibilities. Generally, I don't feel that's needed, but that's something I have done in the past just to really get a feel for some of the more common cues that people are dealing with and what the devices are actually covering up. As I see it, they're kind of taking off the edge. At our non-for-profit hospital, with physician's orders, and the Illinois state law requires that, they are billable to insurance, and many insurances do have pediatric benefits. So that's generally a very positive thing.
I think that last, everyone, you need to check in your own state. I know in my state, that's just going through the, in the capital now, we don't have that. So every state's going to be different. I think California does. I don't know about anyone else. Okay, thank you. Did anyone else have something for that topic? No. Okay. So we really haven't looked at dealing with families, dealing with this in a marriage, dealing with your kids. And what if it's the parent with misophonia and the kid is triggering the parent, and you need to try to explain it to them? How do you get the others in the family, whether it be a parent, a partner, a sibling, to help the individual with misophonia? Jolene.
All right, I'm licensed as a marriage and family therapist. I work with a lot of interpersonal relationship factors of anything that's going on in a family. Something going on with one person is going to affect the others. And I find that metaphors are sometimes very useful to understand such things. So for example, if your child had an allergy to peanuts, would you keep peanuts in the house? No, you would not, unless you were being a very cruel person. Would you do your darndest to help the school environment know that they should require their students not to have peanut-based products in their lunch bag? People do these things because we know that there are certain things like that. So in the family, we want to make an effort to, approach these things appropriately. If your daddy happened to be a person who had PTSD because he was in the military and those loud explosions freaked him out, the kids would know that when they're around daddy, because they care about him and they love him and they don't want to hurt him or upset him, that's not the best time to slam things down or make loud, sudden noises, because he's going to have a reaction to it. They learn over time like they learn everything else over time, because we educate them. We ask them to be as helpful as they can, and we try to be helpful to them in exchange, like what kinds of things do you need? The problem with misophonia for a lot of people is that it is not visible. If you had a child in a wheelchair, would you make accommodations in your house so that they could reach things or get into the bathroom? Of course you would. Misophonia doesn't happen to have such a visible outside. And so that's why it's harder for other people, in part that's why, to understand. But it's definitely a family relationship situation. It almost always starts in the family for various reasons, and some that we've talked about. It is the place that people spend the most of their time. So of course it's going to affect the person with misophonia, other family members, siblings. I mean, siblings we got to pay special attention to, because any special needs child, wheelchair or misophonia or whatever, is going to take a lot of parents' attention and time away from other children. And we don't want those other children to feel abandoned, and we don't want them to suddenly develop symptoms of something in order to get their parents' attention. So families have to take time to be with each of their children individually, go do something for, I saw a research thing recently that said 20 minutes with each child, with each parent, once a week is all that is needed. I mean, it's pretty minimal, but at the bare minimum, 20 minutes. So that parent takes one child and says, what would you like to do? And they will then play a game or read a book or go out for a bike ride or whatever it is, special for each individual child. And if you happen to have a whole bunch of kids, well, you had a whole bunch of kids. So now you got to provide for all of your kids. And it's very difficult to give each child what they need. And yet that's what we need to do as parents. It's our job. So it is a family related condition, and the family needs to be involved in addressing it, or it's not going to work. It's going to be very difficult.
Anyone else? No. Okay. So I think the next one we're going to go to is back in the family. How do you balance accommodations at home with the other family members? Is there something more they can do, or maybe a deal they can make? And coping strategies for mealtime, whether it's just a couple eating together or the kids with family strategies, coping mechanisms.
I feel like I should jump in here first. I have this brilliant idea that we will all design a house for people who have misophonia. A home that is designed for people who suffer from this decreased sound sensitivity. And so we must immediately eliminate the great room. Immediately. The great room is like an amplifying noise mechanism that sends crinkling package sounds down every corridor to every room in the house. I'm actually being kind of serious about this. You can redesign your life when you have misophonia. Probably one of the most helpful things I tell people in my clinic is remove all china dishware and metal utensils. Immediately move to melamine, plastic, wooden, bamboo. Think of things, paper plates. Stop and eliminate as many of the trigger problems as you can possibly to accommodate the person. Put your chips when you come home into Tupperware containers with soft lids. Have a tiny bell you keep on the counter, and if you go in the kitchen to do something noisy, ring it so the misophones in the house can flee to their sanctuaries. Build small dwellings around your backyard. Turn your garage into a place where someone lives. Just move things around and shake things up and try to say, what's the most comfortable setting here? And how can we all be comfortable living together? And I'm constantly reminding my patients, eating together is not necessary. Many cultures in the world do not eat together. Eating is a 5, 10, 15-minute activity. Then you have together time and have fun when you're not eating. Anyway, I have so much to say on this. I could talk for an hour and a half, but I will be quiet now and retreat back to my non-presence.
I think
I would say that,
Marsha,
okay, go ahead, Chris.
Okay, one at a time. Who started first?
Chris, go ahead.
it was just a very brief comment, really. I was just going to say, sadly, Marsha, many families see meal times as being the only time that the whole family is together. What you're describing here is a family that has a balanced relationship with each other outside of the dining room.
This is a barbaric custom related to when we crouched around fires and roasted raw meat and tried to survive. We are now at a different age. You can have 6 or 7 lovely eating areas around your home, set up with napkins and whatever you might need, and think of it as fueling, and then have the social and fun time with your family. So this is just such a simple thing. Forget the Norman Rockwell 20 people around a turkey thing. Never mind. You don't need that model.
I don't think you do, but a lot of people take that as being the norm. And that's
Well, we need to re-educate people. That is the biggest complaint. When I first get a note from somebody saying my kid is having this reaction, we can't even eat at the table anymore. And it's such a simple thing to solve. Well, then just don't give up that idea that you have to eat together. You can do other things together, play a board game, go for a bike ride. You can do any number of family things together. If that's the only time you have to get together, which is understandable, people are busy and they use that dinner time as, okay, we're going to catch up with each other. Do the things that other people have suggested, where somebody eats first and somebody else eats later. And then, but meanwhile, you have the time where if anybody's eating, it's the person with misophonia, but you're able to sit at the table and talk and catch up with each other. And then that person leaves and everybody else can go ahead and eat, or however you want to work it. I love Megan's idea of having rotations of, who gets to go watch TV while they're eating and have it be maybe the other kid sometimes. I sometimes say to people, those 10 commandments the dude brought down the mountain, does it say anywhere on there that thou shalt eat dinner together as a family every night? No, of course it does not. Figure out a way to do it.
Yeah.
Changing norms is not easy, Chris, but I've been studying your country's history. It was not very long ago that you were born into a station of life. And if you were a serf, you were a serf for life. If you tried to run away, they could kill you. That was the norm. So
I wouldn't challenge that, Marsha.
Okay.
But I think that for those families where eating at the meal table together is seen as being unavoidable, I usually suggest that in that case, the person with misophonia has permission to leave the table, provided they do so politely and respectfully, as long as everyone else at the table is also respectful and the person who leaves has an intention to return when they feel better. Now that, I think, has a double benefit, because that alerts the other members of the family to the feelings of the person with misophonia.
I'm going to say something to you, Chris, because what we should do with this is got to be the #1 topic for families that come into all of our clinics and who encounter all of us. This is the hottest, most irritating thing for both sides. Honestly, we should just have a whole conference on dealing with eating together with misophonia, because I just can't tell you.
Marsha, that's the next clinic, is eating together. Chris, I do something similar to you. I think that everyone has heard this and can make their own decision. Since we still have questions and we're just over 15 minutes away from the end of
make
this.
one
Yes.
comment on this. I think this is a very sensitive area of how to navigate these situations, because ultimately speaking, like Chris was saying, the family dinner is nothing short for many of a sacred part of the family experience. And I think that there's a middle ground here, which Chris alluded to, which is that there's the family stays at the table, and the member who is suffering could gradually re-enter with certain skills and coping tools that can make that experience more tolerable. I think that it's a huge mistake in terms of rearranging the entire family to accommodate the misophonia, because I think it signals how does somebody learn when they go out into the world that there are going to be people who are not going to accommodate that. It's going to be way more difficult to learn how to deal with the situations that you can't do anything at all.
Oh my gosh.
So
Now I have to jump back in here and interrupt Ezra, but listen to me. Think of misophonia as diabetes. Please start thinking of it like
I don't think of
diabetes.
it. I don't think of it that way.
I know, but I want you to start spending a few minutes imagining that you would say to your child, listen, sit here with us and eat what we eat, because you're going to have to get used to it. You're just going to have to get used to it.
So
this is for me really the crux here. This is the crux. This is an involuntary cell-based situation. This is where we fall between behavioral and physiological. And if we're behavioral, we can talk about those things. If we believe it's physiological, like diabetes, now we have a whole nother set of problems.
So what I would say is I'm glad you brought that point up, because we're not forcing anybody to stay in a triggering environment and just to create harm and make someone feel uncomfortable. At the same time, I don't view this as a diabetic issue in the regard that it's a disease that is that could only be addressed in a certain way. I believe that people could learn how to overcome misophonia using specific strategies. So from that perspective, I think it's a mistake within this perspective to accommodate the situation and not learn how to deal with the actual reaction, and that this is something that might not go away, that people might not change their behavior. So I'm not going to ever want to deal with how to go about this in a more effective way. So
I'm going to go ahead, finish your thought, and then I'm going to stop everybody there so we can go on for something more constructive here.
So, ultimately, I just want to end off that I don't think we could, just because we don't fully understand misophonia, I don't think we could say that this is like the equivalent of diabetes. That's my point. I don't want to start reconstructing societies and how we go about things just because we don't understand misophonia. That's my point.
I respect your opinion, Ezra, very much. And I'm basing my opinions, which are just a funny little audiologist in Portland, Oregon. But I am going to tell you, I have interviewed thousands and thousands of people with misophonia. I have spoken directly to them. And if you speak directly to them and ask these questions yourself about this eating issue and these kinds of things, I have come to the more disease side of this equation, because it's just so astounding how identical they are, how distressed they are, how they are trying to learn to cope with it, how they're trying not to deal with being accommodated, how they desperately want to not be accommodated, and how they're having almost like a diabetic response. So I leave the question in the air for the future. I'll let Cindy regain control of this rowdy group.
I'm taking it back now. Thank
but
you,
I'm going to
Marcia.
stick by my opinion.
So I think that I see points on either side. I've done it both ways, eating separate, but a lot of times they have a contract. The child's allowed to get up and just leave the table. When they feel able to come back, they return. And eventually they can listen to things, but not cover up the ability to hear others. So maybe this would be and do a single topic clinic the next time we do this on various ways that have been handled, and maybe the audience that attends can also share some of their ways with us as well. But an area we really haven't hit are the young adults, maybe those 18 to 22. So before we go, I do want to hit it. These kids are leaving for college. I know I've written a number of letters to get them single rooms and things like that, but how do they handle it? How do they handle the breathing and exams that could really exacerbate a reaction? Do they get separate accommodations at the Office of Students with Disabilities? And some kids won't even try to learn how to reduce their symptoms. They don't even try to go in equipped with accommodations for success. So can we address some of this for the last 10 minutes of this meeting? Anyone?
I'll start. Going through both doing 504s for kids in school and then Department of Disability through college is a critical and important part. I have some general recommendations, but then work with each individual to really let them review it and see what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I put as indicated. One thing that's interesting that I have found is that from an audiologist perspective, and it may not be as much from a psychologist perspective, just using abnormal auditory perception on occasion will not get everything done. But when I have had the addition of the objective measurements with abnormalities in the video nystagmography and what that can mean functionally, that has been able to get the accommodations that were needed for the individual. And then knowing that whatever is requested, it's always subject to additions, changes, and generally our policy at our hospital is as long as I've seen once within the last year that I'm able to continue to work and edit and adjust if there's other additions. And I encourage people to, take responsibility for their own bodies. Since the last, probably 7 years, especially the last 5 years, I feel like I'm becoming more and more of a healthier person, just using these principles that I teach my patients to calm their systems, be responsible and understand what's going on, healthy eating, healthy exercise. All those principles are going to help each one of us when, the fight or flight is going off way too often in our bodies. So just being able to take that ownership and do positive things can make a huge difference in the long run. And really just asking my patients, what are their goals? What do they want to achieve? And then seeing how we can work in conjunction. And then of course, outside referrals is really important. And with signed releases, I will consult all the time with different specialists, particularly talk therapists.
Chris.
When I'm asked to write an accommodation letter, and often am for clients based in USA, I usually begin by saying client's name has misophonia, period. I then go on to say that they meet all the criteria set out in the proposed diagnostic criteria as published in 2017. Now that gets us round any diagnosis requirement. It says that they meet the criteria that were published in a peer-reviewed journal and therefore have a condition which requires accommodation. I then go on to list the things that I think in their particular instance would benefit them. Now, I don't know what others do in terms of making a statement to say that the person has misophonia. I don't think saying that they have an auditory processing disorder is appropriate because the requirements for that are likely very different. We can't say they have some sort of functional neurological disorder because FND is treated quite differently. All of these things taken into account, I use as a strategy.
So Chris, I'd love to see your statement. We use abnormal auditory perception, meaning that they don't perceive things like others, which is pretty much what it is. But I'd love to see your statement, and I bet everybody else here who writes those Section 504 letters would as well.
Well, they seem to have the appropriate result. But I do like to very much promote the fact that this person has something which is identifiable.
Yeah, I haven't had any problems with my letters, and every kid has either received an animal and their own room in the dorms. If they needed an emotional support animal, they've had that. So I feel pretty lucky that so far my kids have gotten everything, but I'd love to see your statement. But what do we do with the ones who don't even want to try to help themselves? They've just given up. How do we help those kids?
Yeah, there's actually more of them than you think around the world. I've gotten many phone calls over the last 25 years from parents with adult age kids, 18 to 25, 30, living at home, isolated in the bedroom, earplugged, max earmuffs, not functioning, like entombed. And the parents don't know what to do. You know, you can't compel an adult person to go into treatment or go somewhere. These are really difficult cases, and I think they're the saddest ones. And that's where, you know, these lovely people that are willing to do stuff on Zoom is just so, so helpful.
I think also, Marcia, those who have left home, not necessarily for college, where there's often an intention to return, but have left home in a relationship, the relationship has then failed and they've gone home, then find intra-family member misophonia far more disruptive than they did before they left home first time round.
Exactly. And then they sever those relationships. This is the damnedest disease, whatever you want to call it, condition. It just destroys family life for a lot of people. And it's something. I hope we come up with something. I hope one day they just poke something in your head and give you a needle, or I don't know what they're going to do, but something, because, you know, sometimes you advise people, like I know several people right here in this audience, that telling them to get their kid an apartment at 18, because then life will improve. And that's a terrible thing to have to tell somebody. Send their 16-year-old away for the summer, live with grandma on the farm and run the cows around or something, just to get a big change, an environmental change. They do better when they travel and they move around, and they're not in the same situation every night after night where they've got these associated negative triggers.
Okay, yes, Jillian.
As far as young adults not wanting to do whatever it is, I look at adolescence, childhood and adolescence and young adulthood. One of the big things we want to do is be in charge of our own lives. We want to learn to take control of things. We don't want to have our parents make all the decisions for us. We want to be able to make choices and make our own decisions about things. So I will point out to them that if they had an option, if they could do something, if they could take control and manage this and be in charge and not be at the mercy of everybody else's horrible and obnoxious behavior, I'll buy into that temporarily, then would they want to do that? I try to get them to consider the benefit to them. I also have this handy dandy thing right here that I keep in my desk, which is I give them this other option, which is I have a magic wand. I could just wave that and make it all be better. Not really. So since that isn't going to work, and since you cannot make, one of the first things I have people do, and I suggest that some of you online might try this, make a list of things you can or cannot control or change or do anything about. Make 2 lists. And then notice where your attention goes. It's the serenity prayer from the 12-step programs. If you're going to put all your energy into the things you cannot do anything about, that is just infuriating and frustrating and it'll get you nowhere. Put your energy into the things you can do something about. And you need to learn some tools to do that if you don't already have them. And I tell people, you know, when I give them something, try this, see what happens. It's not homework, it's just try this. And they come back the next week and they say, well, I didn't do it. I say, well, I don't care. It doesn't make any difference to me. You can do it or not do it. It's, you know, your life, it's your world. I'm just telling you that if you try some of these things I'm offering to you, you may notice that you have more power over it. But I don't want to be responsible for this. I don't want to have to deal with this. I have a story, I've told it in a presentation for the association convention. It's on a video someplace, but I tell a story to people about a honking horn. And the short version of it is there was nothing I could do about this situation with people coming around this curb where I was living and honking their horn. Nothing. I tried everything I could think of. And what I finally had to do was come to terms with it. I can't change that. So what can I change? And when we begin to look at what we can change, what we can do something about, then we regain control. And there's nothing better than being able to manage your own life. Young adult going off to school.
So we're pretty much at the end of this. I would also, yes, Chris.
I was just going to say that somebody has just posted, can we end on a note of optimism?
All right, I was about to go there a little bit.
Okay, right. Well,
You want to give your optimistic ending?
my note of optimism is that amongst the group of therapists with whom I work worldwide in the USA, Canada, Europe, UK, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand, we're now seeing a significant reduction in symptoms in 80% of those we're working with. Now, that is so much better than it was a few years ago. For some of them, okay, there is a complete remission of symptoms, but 80% with a significant reduction in the symptoms has to be optimism.
And I would also add, sometimes not being so clinical and clinically correct, but sitting down and talking with them. I'm not a real fan of the disease attitude. I think this is just you. Everybody has something. This is what you have. And the kids seem to respond to that. And I'll have, even if they don't get devices, a parent go to me, call me 2 weeks later and go, I don't know what you did because I was there, but this kid is actually way better. And maybe just normalizing it for them, making them feel they're not that far out and giving them control. Here's tools for you of what you can do. Is some of what we need to look at and not be so much of a doctor. So unless Marcia has anything to say.
I just want to end on a similar note that I believe we're at a very exciting time in terms of relative to where we've come from. I'm a relative newcomer, and just in the short span of time that I started to do the research 5 years ago, the research base is exploding. And I foresee that will continue. And I think more minds coming together to help everyone who showed up today. And there's more money being poured in, and there are amazing organizations such as this, the Misophonia Association. So we're here for you, or we're all working to help you and to help your families. And there will be things getting better and better over time.
And Marcia, did you want to add something before we log out?
I always have something to add. You know that.
I knew that. That's why I started to ask you.
Like a fierce Western warrior. And what I think actually in the long run is what we're going to find. When I was a child, cancer in the 1950s, cancer was seen as like a similar thing that just ran around to different parts of your body. And then over time, scientific research has shown that each one of these things has a genetic footprint. It can have gourmet treatments, targeted therapies. It's like having I don't know, just something very simple that turned into an extremely complex thing. So I am hoping that misophonia is kind of the same way. that with research and brain science and all the adjunct therapies and all the supportive, loving counseling provided by a lot of people, I'm hoping that down the road we'll find out, because I think this explains why some people might find some help to go to a functional neurologist. Some people might find help going to somebody dealing with reflexes. Someone else might be benefiting from psychological counseling techniques. Other people, perhaps pure sound therapy. So there's a reason why we have different groups of people responding to different therapies. And I think down the road, we may be able to tailor this more and then hit earlier on the effective therapies so people don't have to spend thousands of dollars going around like Little Red Riding Hood in the woods looking for the wolf, you know, and along the way visiting all these other places. That's my secret wish. And I am positive about it. I like everything that was said today and all the different people here. And I think it's a gift to have your time and energy. I just don't think we have the answer yet. And I reserve the right to be incredibly personally frustrated by that situation on your behalf.
Okay, well, I agree that different strokes for different folks, so to speak. And I think we will be able, maybe we should work on a questionnaire tool, but I think that as we narrow them down, we will be able to get to people faster. So with that, I would like everyone to really thank Jolene Jaffe, Ezra Cowan, Christopher Pearson, and Megan Bradshaw for giving us their time and their expertise today. And I would like to thank all of you who joined us, because without you, we wouldn't be doing this. And we want you to know that we're here for you. We want to be here for you to help and try to work with you in finding strategies and solutions. And with that, I'm gonna.
One parting comment. I want to say bless you to all the parents who struggle with children with any kind of special needs. You have a special little corner in heaven waiting for you, because you have been given this child and you have to figure out what to do and how to run your family. And you are doing the best you can, which is, you know, maybe sometimes not exactly as good as you'd like, but the research says you don't have to be perfect. You have to be a good enough parent, which means you correct your mistakes when you've made them. You know, you apologize if you yelled at somebody for something or whatever it is. And children learn from the repair of a mistake as much as they learn from having, maybe even more than having done everything perfectly, which is impossible in the first place. Bless you.
And the final parting is, I'd like to thank Troy Reisdorf. Without him, we could not be putting any of this on. He is the guy in the background who coordinates, who sets up meetings to make sure this is gonna go and work just right. And so I'd like to thank him and Marcia as well for joining us and changing her plans from today to be here and always having such good points to bring in.
Thank you. Yes, Troy. I know right before we opened, we had a little technical slight glitch and everyone was in a total state of chaos except Troy, who just fixed it.
Thank you, Cindy, for being such a terrific moderator and for all the time you put into the association.
Oh, thank you. You as well, on time and at every one of these. So with that, we're going to all sign off and see you at the next one in June. Bye.
Captain.
Bye.
I think it's all on eating stuff for that one.
Yee, wee.
Okay.
That was fun.
Good job, everyone.
I know, that was nice. I enjoyed it.
I thought it went around very well.
Ezra is stalwart. Ezra is stalwart and steadfast.
Have you stopped? Troy, is it stopped?
No, I think we have to actually just all leave.
We have to all leave,
I'll
so.
leave then. Thanks a lot, Troy. And all of you.
Bye, Chris.
Bye, thank you, Chris. What time is it there?
It's
Bye.
coming up for 9 in the evening, so I hope you have a good day.
So
ahead
it's not that bad. You still have some evening time left.
of-
All right. Have a good day,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Fingers
Good
and mash.
night.